You are a regular cube. You can take up space at the LGS. You are a regular cube. You can be drafted with any number of players. You are a regular cube. You can break singleton for whatever you want. You are a regular cube. You know how to be broadcast shuffled. You are a regular cube. You are full of your creator's favorite cards. You are a regular cube. You pay no mind to power outliers. You are a regular cube. Your rounds do not go to time, except sometimes they do, and that's okay. You are a regular cube. You know what it means to be you.
Wow, I found that one strangely inspiring.
Oh, hi there. I didn't see you come in. Welcome to another episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy. I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony Perfect Teeth Maddox.
Okay. Did not see that one coming.
I mean, in our long friendship, I don't ever remember you having any sort of tooth troubles of any variety.
I've been in pretty good shape.
Have you ever had a cavity filled?
No.
Have you ever had any orthodontic work ever?
I did have braces when I was young.
Okay, when you were young, you had braces. Yeah. I bring it up only because I have just finished my year of Invisalign.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Welcome to the Perfect Teeth Club. I'll see you at the meeting next month.
Yeah, people may have noticed that I started lisping very slightly. I worked hard to not lisp too terribly.
I don't think anybody noticed.
No, people definitely noticed. I was told by a couple people. I'm not sure what percentage of people noticed. About a year ago, I started doing that. Anyway, now I'm back to having full control over my enunciation.
Incredible.
We are
you love
hitting
to see it.
those syllables. We are smacking these syllables with great force.
As a podcaster, it's good to keep your equipment in tip-top shape.
This is a potpourri episode, Anthony. We're just going to talk about some of our recent drafts of our local cubes. We don't talk about this a lot on the show, but we play Cube every week, usually a draft or two. And so, we want to take the opportunity just to check in. We did mention specifically on a previous episode we were going to report back on how Chains of Mephistopheles fared in the Turbo Cube draft from last week. So we're definitely going to talk about the Turbo Cube draft. We can get your thoughts on the first outing for Chains of Mephistopheles.
You're doing great. Your equipment's in tip-top shape, and you can say the word Mephistopheles.
And then we had an interesting experience drafting this week, which we'll talk about, and maybe we'll get to talking about some drafts I've had recently of my own Sacred Geometry Cube. But I think we should start with the Turbo Cube. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, should we give just a little bit of context about the way that we play Cube? Because I feel like we do talk just mostly about Cube design, and we don't talk maybe as much as we should or could about playing Cube outside of some event reports.
Yeah, I mean, what is there to say? I guess we'll find out in this episode, but we don't often talk about what happened in games or, what the actual texture of gameplay of specific experiences we've had is. But yeah, I think it's worth checking in, and we had some interesting weeks here that I think bear some investigation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's also worth the context that we play Cube once a week, and we have a pretty big group, so we usually have between 2 to 4 pods. Often it's not perfect 8s, but we just make it work. And so we're just drafting a whole bunch of different cubes. We have 50 in the sort of heavy rotation in the play group, and others that people are constantly brewing up. So yeah, I mean, our Cube play experience is pretty mixed, pretty varied.
Correct. It's easy to take for granted that most people, even if they do have a local play group, which a lot of people don't really have a active local play group, even if they do, they may have, 1 to 3 cubes they are drafting in that local play group. And for us, I mean, we could, if we chose, probably go 6 months without ever drafting the same cube twice at Cube Night. It would not be that difficult.
I sort of intentionally try and avoid a cube that I've played recently. Do you not do the same, or do you like to have some consistency in
I like to draft my cubes.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
So if my cubes fire, I will be in those pods if I can swing it.
But you didn't this last week.
I
feel like you haven't a couple times recently.
I'm happy to be flexible when the group needs flexibility, but all other things equal, I'd like to draft my own cubes because I want to see and experience what my designs are doing. I feel like there is no replacement for actual first-hand experience playing the cube as a design input. Even people telling you what their experience was is so filtered already in terms of what they thought to tell you about. So actually playing, I think, is really important as a cube design feedback tool.
Definitely. And so, I think that's going to be most people's experience, that cube designers want to play their own cubes. They've made them not universally true, but pretty generally true. They've made it including the cards that they want to play with. It makes sense that you want to sit down at that table if you have the option.
Yeah, that's on top of the idea that I, of course, just like to play the cubes I designed. I designed them that way because that's how I like to play Magic. But beyond that even, I just think it's really useful for cube design, and so I like to do it for that reason too. If you put my cubes aside, it's been a long time since I've drafted the same cube that is not mine at our Tuesday night event, which is also a good time to mention if you are in the greater Baltimore area, the DMV, wherever, and you want to come out to Cube Night, you can find us on an OM Beyond in Baltimore City.
Which
every
sounds
Tuesday
like a
night.
crazy thing to say, but we had multiple people that were new this first time this week that just found the group through the podcast. So great to meet you all.
It happens pretty often. And when we had like Sam's video about Hunter Ornithopters, there were a bunch of people that like, I didn't even have any idea this store had a cube thing because
Even
I just,
people that were
a
like,
Magic player.
I'm here every Wednesday for Commander,
Yes.
and I didn't realize this was happening until I saw this YouTube video made by a
Correct.
person that doesn't even live in this city.
Yeah.
What a
never been
wild
here.
ride.
Can we get into the Turbo Cube now?
Let's do it. Context established.
Well, no, you have to establish more context of what the Turbo Cube is now.
You're right. So the Turbo Cube is my cube that is perfectly normal except for one small rules change that all spells and activated abilities cost 2 generic mana less. It started out sort of as a little bit of a joke, but turns out it's kind of fun. Everybody's just playing Storm or playing against Storm, not necessarily in the most literal sense, but you're just taking tons of game actions. All these like free cantrippy artifacts are super powerful and kind of define and set the tempo and the tone of the format. And I've had this cube for a while now. I haven't made any heavy updates, but as promised for a long time, there's like a pending batch of updates that I've been considering. Like we mentioned, there's a lot of cubes in the group, so I don't feel a lot of pressure to keep things super updated, to keep things fresh, because, I mean, there's lots to explore here. What'd you end up drafting in the Turbo Cube last week?
I desperately just wanted to pack one, pick one Chains of Mephistopheles, which, as we mentioned in a previous episode, is a new addition.
The one change that we made was we put in this Chains of Mephistopheles.
Don't say we, like the rest of us aren't trying to make changes. The one change that you made was putting in Chains of Mephistopheles. You've got a bunch of other pending sort of edits that are sitting on some maybe board in your brain, but yeah, that's a new card that I was excited to play with, purely just from a curiosity of like, how can I break symmetry on this? Is this any good? Like, you know, I wanted to see and answer those questions for myself. And I did not ever see it in packs, so I did not get to draft Chains of Mephistopheles. Instead, I started off in pack 1, and you should say this is drafted in 4 packs of 13.
That sounds right, yeah.
It's your cube design. You draft it in 4 packs of 13. You give people a larger pool because you need very few lands in a typical Turbo Cube deck.
Correct. And
so,
I didn't want to make huge packs because it's already pretty overwhelming. So looking at 13 cards at a time is plenty.
Yeah, right. You didn't want to do 20 card packs or whatever. So you're doing 4x13. That just means you get a bigger pool. Your deck gets to be better. And in pack 1, I left the pack almost entirely colorless. I started by taking colorless cards. I took a pretty early cards that I think are like power adjacent. They're not Guild Globe level, but things like Salvage Mana Worker and Collector's Vault are cards that I rate very, very highly because they provide either free mana or, in the case of Collector Vault, free mana and free looting, which is quite good, and also mana fixing in both of their cases. Then I took a bunch of like kind of aggressive, you know, colorless cards, and on the wheel I started picking up some red cards, and to be perfectly honest, I forget which ones specifically looking at my deck right now. I should have taken a picture of pick order. If I thought we were going to talk about this on the show, I would have taken a picture of pick order, but I got into red late into pack 1, and then red felt very open at my seat, specifically like the aggressive red deck felt open at my seat. And so I speculatively took a couple like power outliers in other colors, but I ended up mono red, essentially, splashing Jehoira Weatherlight Captain, which is the 4 mana or 2 mana in this environment, legendary creature that says whenever you cast a historic spell, you get to draw a card. And obviously, I've got a lot of artifacts in my deck that are otherwise 0 mana, so I can just kind of combo off with that.
Artifacts are a pretty big theme in this cube.
For sure. And mine's just kind of a pretty straight up and down aggro deck with maybe a couple exceptions. I did have Aetherflux Reservoir, which was not honestly that good in this deck. I did get one win with it, I believe. The deck's only real sources of like drawing a bunch of cards were Jehoira, Dark Dweller Oracle, which in this cube can be a massive card advantage engine because it allows you to, for free, sacrifice a creature to play the top card of your library till end of turn. And if the top card of your library is a free spell, especially a creature, you just get to keep doing that. And in this deck, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 creatures that are free to cast.
Wow.
Plus other free cards off the top of my deck that draw cards. So a couple times I went off with Dark Dweller Oracle drawing a bunch of cards. And one of those times, it also included a kill with Aetherflux Reservoir. But for the most part, my deck is just aggressive. My last couple cuts were just additional burn spells, removal spells I didn't need. You don't have like face burn in here explicitly. There is
There's a little bit, but it's not a huge thing.
well, there's like I have the one that the burn spell with trample. What's that one? I didn't main deck it, so I can't.
Question.
It's a sorcery.
Flame spell?
It's a flame spell. That's it. Yeah, it's a sorcery, which is why I didn't main deck it. But that one's a way to do face damage. But yeah, I basically cut a couple of those, which I had extra sort of leftovers. But a lot of my cuts ended up just being my speculative picks into other colors when I ultimately got to the end of the draft and decided that I should just be mono red. Before I spoil how the draft went for me, what did you draft?
So we'll also put the full deck list in the show notes if you want to see these for a little bit more detail. I don't want to say that my deck was a train wreck, but it was definitely one of the least focused Turbo Cube decks that I've drafted in a while. I started out just taking, there's kind of a easy set of heuristics that you can follow drafting the Turbo Cube. You take like the free spells and the eggs, especially things that are both neutral or positive on cards and mana, very, very highly. You don't pass those. There are some sort of payoff cards like a Retrofitter Foundry, I think is just one of the better cards in the cube because it can just generate a ton of little tokens. I also take things that cycle for free very highly and mana fixing. So I was looking for those and, so I ended up just having like a bunch of cards early in pack 1 that don't necessarily pull me in a specific direction, but are just kind of solid cards. I think I had Savin's Reclamation and Recruiter of the Guard, so I was sort of interested in going in a white direction. And wasn't really sure beyond that. But a couple cards ended up kind of confusing me or pulling me in different directions. I got a pretty late
Confused
Lelia,
by
the
a card of
Blade
your own
Reforged.
cube.
Yeah, and a very late Mana Gorger Hydra. And those are two cards that I think are just some of the best fair cards. They aren't like doing a busted storm thing, but they just generate a ton of value or just like an enormous threat.
Mana Gorger Hydra was pack 1, I remember, because I think I saw it like pick 2 or 3, and I considered going to green for it that early, but instead I took a like slightly less overall powerful, but a colorless card to like prevent me from being committed to a color. And then you were many seats away from me when you got it. So that Mana Gorger Hydra continued to be disrespected.
It can look kind of innocuous, and again, it's not like it is an egg that you absolutely have to take, but it easily is a card that just you play it on turn 1, and then it will be a 15/15 by the time it's attacking, and your opponent doesn't necessarily have a lot of removal that will deal with it. Unfortunately, my opponents always had removal that dealt with it, but sometimes that's just how it breaks.
I also think that if you are drafting this cube with people that are newer to it, it is somewhat likely that games will often actually kind of turn out to be like, well, just who's got a 4/4 left over?
Right,
because,
yeah.
It's a novel concept, and if you're not sort of adept at building a cube in this new space, then sometimes you just don't have enough card advantage or something, and you're like, well, here's a Mir Superior. Can you beat a Mir Superior? And, I mean, that's a 0 mana 4/7 or whatever, 4/5 or whatever. It's a incredibly efficient card, but famously that card not a part of any of the best decks in this cube.
I also ended up with a couple of the Hate Bears, which is a kind of deck that I'm pretty happy to draft, and I'm also honestly pretty happy to put Hate Bears just in kind of any deck. So when I say Hate Bears, I mean cards like Eidolon of Rhetoric that prevents people from casting more than one spell a turn, or I had Collector Oof that prevents people from activating artifacts, and these cards can be really strong, and even if you have a bunch of artifacts or a bunch of spells you want to be casting in one turn, if you're on the draw or you're on the play, you can just cast your whole hand and then end on one of those cards, and hopefully just sort of shut your opponent out of the game. That's like not the most focused strategy, considering I did have a number of little artifacts and things that I wanted to be able to cast, and I wanted to be able to use the Retrofitter Foundry, but I kind of felt like, this is not going to be the most focused deck, but I'll figure out where we're going to go from there. I also ended up with Oko Thief of Crowns and Duretti Ingenious Iconoclast and a Toxic Deluge, which is, I think, a card that is very, very strong here because it's a 1-mana board wipe, and if your opponent's dumped their whole hand doing something crazy, it can often just counter your opponent's first turn. So like I said, pretty unfocused. We're playing green, white, red with a little bit of a black splash and a tiny blue splash. And honestly, the most difficult part for me with that, I was counting on things like Guild Globe and Chromatic Star and a couple other eggs to be able to help with those splashes. But I also just had so many lands, it was really difficult to fit them into my deck. Okay, I really want at least one fetchable blue source, but that means I'm now playing, I think I ended up playing 12 lands or something like that, which is just way more lands than I actually wanted in the deck, but I needed it to get the sources that I need. So it was a little bit of a difficult, unwieldy thing, and I definitely lost some games just to weird, awkward draws or not being able to have the color of mana that I needed at the right time.
Now, as the cube designer, how do you feel about what is that cycle of lands called? The lands that have a activated ability, pay 1 generic and tap them to produce 2 different colors of mana. They're like mana fixing lands they were started in some old school set and then finished recently in a commander product. I don't know what you call that cycle, but
I don't think anybody calls them anything because they don't get played anywhere.
Right.
They're the filter lands, but it's 1 generic mana to make 2 specific colors.
Yes, and that's all they do.
Right.
They don't do anything else. Do they tap for colorless?
No, not even.
They don't tap for colorless. So that's all they do, which means you have to put mana into them to get mana out of them. Here they just tap for 2. They're just, quite good soul lands because they tap for 2 and fix your mana. But famously, there's oftentimes not almost anything to do in this cube with generic mana because you have sort of pursued some of the most powerful things you can consider doing in this environment, and it turns out the most powerful cards, or the cards that get the biggest buff from this rules modification, are ones that had exactly 2 generic mana in their cost or their activated ability. And so if you can't use both colors of the mana that land is producing, oftentimes you have nothing to do with that extra mana anyway. You ended up with 6 or 7 of them in your pool, I think, from this draft.
I think it was maybe 4. Maybe I was
Did you
hyperbolizing
exaggerate?
a little bit.
I
but-
thought you said you had 6 or 7 and then you only played 4.
Or maybe it was 5. I ended up with a ton of them. It was very surprising. I think that they are very good. It's obviously just like a land that just taps for 2 mana, enters untapped. They are very, very strong. But I think I agree that they're not necessarily as strong as they seem. But because I was getting a bunch of them late, that was also kind of a hypothesis that I wanted to test a little bit, where I'm like, okay, well, I have this land that just taps for green-blue. I'm just going to put this in my deck and assume it's a forest, and that's fine. And occasionally it will also cast Oko, and that'll be great if I can do that every once in a while. It sort of worked, but again, like I did end up cutting a couple of them from my deck just because it was so difficult to find the space.
Interesting. I do wonder if that deck can be a thing, and maybe you have to go in and like force it a little harder and just be like, I'm going to force, gold cards and these lands that tap for 2 and just trust that I'm going to see a lot of them and get a lot of them because people are like not valuing them super highly. I did have my on-color one, and it is genuinely one of the reasons I splashed Shoira.
That makes sense, yeah.
The fact, like, she's only really good when you then have a handful of colorless spells to follow up, or a handful of artifacts specifically to follow up. And so the fact that off of Ferris Lake, which is what the blue-red one is, I could just Ferris Lake, Jehoira, then dump a bunch of free spells on turn 1 was a big part of the reason I splashed her. I may have considered cutting her if my fixing land was just another red-blue land, where I would not really realistically going to do this until turn 2, excluding something like Salvage Mana Worker or whatever. But in that situation, I'm not drawing a card for Salvage Mana Worker because I had to play it to cast my Jehoira. So,
which I think is honestly kind of cool. I think that's a positive effect on the environment.
I agree.
Maybe the things that I want to limit and tune down a little bit are some of the just like totally explosive, you win right away on turn 1 kind of games. If the effect that these are having, whether or not it's actually like objectively correct, and if the time-traveling supercomputer would just tell you, like, yeah, just put this in your busted storm deck and win on turn 1. But I like that they at least give people the idea of, okay, maybe this 2-mana planeswalker, really it's a 3 or 4-mana planeswalker, or like powerful payoff creature, actually looks kind of appealing. And now I want to put that in my deck, even though Oko's actually just not that good here on baseline. And in my deck, I thought it was kind of an interesting sort of, again, I think there's this like nugget of a strategy of, okay, well, if I play my Collector Oof and my Eidolons to prevent people from casting spells, that also kind of makes these planeswalkers that are going to generate value over time, which aren't going to be great in these super fast combo decks, are going to be pretty reasonable here. And similar, like, here's my Toxic Deluge that's going to reset the board, and then I'm going to slowly generate value with these planeswalkers. There's a strategy here, sort of, even if my deck isn't quite cohesive. And I'm not really sure what the last, let's call it 40% to make that deck really make sense looks like, but I think there's something here.
Are there decks in your head that you could describe in the Turbo Cube that you think of as like control decks? I mean, it sounds like you're describing like a 3 or 4 color control deck you were playing, where you're like, I'm actually going to get value off these planeswalkers in the long game and play this 1-mana board wipe and whatever. Do you feel like you usually think of Turbo Cube decks in those terms? Could you imagine a control deck from the history of this cube?
I think sort of. People have waffled on how good the Wraths are, and I think that Toxic Deluge stands out because it's just so much more efficient than
the cost
Wrath of God. Yeah,
in this environment than
and
Wrath.
Having Wrath of God or Day of Judgment cost white is really difficult when you're trying to also do a bunch of other stuff in the same deck.
Remind me, is balance in this cube?
Balance is not. Maybe it should be.
It would be quite good. I mean, I think the best mode of it would be to essentially Mind Twist your opponent on turn 1.
Yeah,
But you would not get to keep your creatures. You would only get to keep your non-creature permanents, and you would also have to sacrifice the 1 land you played.
The busted balance turns are going to be busted. Like, oh, here I'm going to play a bunch of eggs that don't draw cards immediately, and then balance, and then refill my hand.
Or I'm going to play my Maze Mind Tome, my Sunset Pyramid, my whatever, my spare supplies, and then I'm going to balance and just send you back to the Stone Age. It could be very cool and would be another 1-mana board wipe in the right deck. That's the kind of card that would make me consider playing control here. Like, my first turn is just Retrofitter Foundry, a bunch of other sort of like dinky little trinket stuff, and then I balance and, set you to like 2 cards in hand, and both of us have no lands, but I have this like material advantage. That's very cool, especially if my deck in the late game can still use balance because I'm not playing a ton of creatures.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I don't know, and the answer is we just like don't have real playtest data because our experience with this cube is very limited. And it's like so weird that people approach it in very different ways. But there have definitely been some players that take the Wraths highly and think that they're very valuable. And I've definitely witnessed plenty of games where your opponent dumps their hand and then you play a Wrath and that kind of like really just wins the game for you. I think the fact that, something like Wrath of God if you can't make white that first turn means, well, you might be trying to set it up to cast on turn 2 when you have already lost. So it's like a little bit of a riskier proposition, and maybe still objectively correct, but people are hesitant about it fairly often. Again, that might be a thing, like if there are some other Wraths that cost like 4 mana but 2 different colors, that actually might be more appealing with the way that the mana fixing is in this cube currently.
I would also be excited about balance, for sure. That would be very cool.
Well, you just love balance, and that's
I do
fine.
love balance. I think it's very cool.
I would be hesitant about balance because I think that the decks that it is best in will really, really be able to abuse it, and it might look a little bit innocuous to a lot of players. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of this cube is there's just
any context shift cube,
so much of a difference between the experience of playing it the first time and playing it the 5th time that you have people that are just playing it on very different levels, which sometimes can be a little bit frustrating for people.
I feel like I more see people that are there for the first time. You know, you set expectations appropriately, which is like, this is going to be difficult, and people in this pod know this cube and you don't. And that actually was the case with this draft. There were like at least 2 drafters that had explicitly planned to draft something else that night and then were willing to, juggle things around to make the pods shake out in a way that were acceptable. And they were like, okay, I did no research on this. I don't know what this is. I guess I'm going to do it. And I think both of them had a good time, mostly because they were like, got to witness the insanity, right? And maybe do a crazy thing themselves once or twice. But I still think it's not the worst first time draft experience for that reason, if you can set expectations appropriately.
Always so important.
I'm looking at the on-color cards in my sideboard, which I was curious to sort of ask you about a little bit. I also had speculated on colorless cards, but that were combo cards. So, like, I had Farmstead Gleaner, but you had taken Pathway Arrows. Someone else had taken Pathway Arrows.
You know I would have, but I didn't.
I was very surprised. I'd never have seen Pathway Arrows. I picked up a speculative Farmstead Gleaner and then did not see Pathway Arrows and was like, well, this is not playable without Pathway Arrows in this cube, I don't think. At least not in my deck.
It's not great. I mean, if you have a vehicle, you can still make an infinitely large creature. If you have Urza as well.
Does not have Urza. I also had a Synod Sanctum that I took, hoping to maybe get an Archaeo Mender when I was still not quite committed to mono red.
I was close to taking that on speculation.
And it was a card that I like. If I was not as aggressive as I would have considered playing Synod Sanctum in my deck anyway, just because it's free and you can re-trigger at least 1 ETB for free on the same turn you play it. I had some targets for it, but ultimately I was like, no, I'm kind of committed to trying to kill my opponent, and so I'm going to leave it out. And then some synergistic funky stuff like doubling Cube and Stronic Resonator, which I like a lot in this cube, but we're just not for my sort of aggressive deck. The red spells I kept in the sideboard. I did cut the Flame Spill, which actually is an instant. I don't know why I cut Flame Spill instead of Soul Seer. Soul Seer is the one that exiles. I guess maybe I thought recursion was more important than extra chip damage in my opponent's face.
I can definitely see that argument.
I started Goblin Rabble Master in the sideboard just as my seemingly worst red aggressive threat. I think that is the case. It's really good with one card in my deck, which is Devilish Valet. I really like Rabble Master Devilish Valet, but other than that, I do think Rabble Master is pretty underwhelming here, and especially as a card that is present in so many other cubes. I wonder if that slot could be something a little more interesting. If you're looking for cuts for these new additions, I would not miss Rabble Master.
That's interesting. I mean, I feel like there's, not to get too designery here, but kind of fun space to explore in 2 directions. One is let's turn junk cards that you've never seen before, maybe you remember from some draft years ago, into very powerful cards. There's also let's take a already known sort of cube card that people are familiar with and recontextualize it in a big way. And it's kind of fun to have those familiar anchors and those novel experiences kind of tied together or put next to each other. I
think that bit gets a little old when the recurring theme of the card you recognize from other cubes is just that, and it's pretty bad here.
Sure, yeah.
Oko's here, and it's pretty bad here, and Jace is here, and he's pretty bad here, and Goblin Rabble Master is here, and he's pretty bad here. It's a couple of those are fun, but beyond that, it's I don't know. I get so excited by the cards that are so uniquely good here. I was really, really taking advantage of Thopter Engineer in my deck. We already talked about Dark Dweller Oracle, Arcbound Tracker, another one of the all-stars in my deck. These cards are all so much better and just so much more exciting to me in this context than something like Goblin Rabble Master. Another card I started in my sideboard is a card I really like here and I'm quite high on. It's Rampaging Ferocidon. And the reason I started it in my sideboard was because I did have the Aetherflux Reservoir in my deck. And I thought, well, if I'm going to put this in my deck and I need to cut one of these red aggressive creatures, I guess maybe I'll just cut the Ferocidon because it's a nombo with Aetherflux Reservoir. I did side that in a couple of times, and there was at least one matchup where I brought in the Flame Spill as an additional removal spell, because as you've pointed out, you do want a removal spell or 2 in most games, because your opponent will probably play a Monastery Mentor or a Sai or a Hate Bear or something you need to deal with. So yeah, I'm not convinced I built the main deck correctly. I could be convinced that it's correct to omit the sort of storm thing, like cut Jehoira, cut Aetherflux Reservoir, play Rampaging Ferocidon, play Flame Spill, Flame Goblin Rabble Master, just go pure mono red aggro. I felt like my blue splash was free enough. I had the Ferris Lake, which is free. It's just a mountain with upside. I had Salvage Mana Worker, which makes blue. Halo Scarab, which makes blue. Jack-o'-lantern, which makes blue. Collector's Vault, which makes blue. So I think it's like 5 or 6 sources. Without having to play a card that I would never put in my deck if I wasn't splashing blue. Like, I didn't play any islands, and I think, managed to splash it pretty safely. Yeah, I'm not sure if I built the deck correctly, but I had a good time, and the deck was really good. I ended up going 3-0 with this deck, and I think I dropped a game in the finals, but overall the deck just kind of really functioned quite well. I didn't get any elusive turn 1 wins, and this deck I think is one of the decks that is much more capable of a turn 1 win than any other strategy, and it would almost always be off the back of Devilish Valet, which is the 3-mana 1/3 that when a creature enters the battlefield, other than it doubles its power until end of turn. And I already mentioned the 10 free creatures I have in my deck, and the Thopter Engineer, which puts 2 creatures in play, even though it does cost a mana. But I also have ways to make additional mana on turn 1. I was a couple games away from like, oh, if this hand had like 2 cards different, I could absolutely just kill him in this turn right before even passing. I didn't quite get there, and I thought that's a good place for us to be. Like, I did not win on turn 1 ever. There was like one game where it was kind of decided on turn 1. I had a kind of crazy Devilish Valet turn on the play, put them to like 6, I think, and then had a board state they had to like also deal with. But it felt appropriate for the Turbo Cube to me. It's cool that like there's Magic Christmas land hands in this deck where I can turn 1 people, but it certainly does not feel like it would be a reliable thing.
Nice, well played. I definitely also like to see just like a pretty straight up aggressive deck succeed sometimes and not just be like a total combo. Even though, I mean, do you almost put a deck that is this aggressive into the kind of combo category?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
like
it
feels different, right?
Everything feels different in the Turbo Cube. Like, you're not going to just like play a 1-drop on 1, play a 2-drop on 2, curve out. Like, that's never what your aggro deck is going to be here anyway. And so I think within the sort of constraints of what the Turbo Cube is, this is just pure aggro. There's nothing else really going on here aside from the Aetherflux Reservoir, like, splash at the top end, basically, which I did win exactly 1 game with. And I won that game very early, too. It happened to be a turn 1 Jehoira game, and then, like, a turn 3 Aetherflux Reservoir with Dark Dweller Oracle, and I just dumped my whole deck and shot my opponent from space. And they were actually one of the players that had never played the Turbo Cube before. Sorry to them for this, but I mean, but they were like, they had done pretty well in the first couple turns of the game and like stabilized and removed some of my stuff or whatever.
It's like, oh great, I turned the corner on the aggro deck, and then you're like, here's a space laser.
Well, and they also had like a reasonable start of their own. Like, I think I was on a turn or 2 clock, and then from like, 6 life, I played the reservoir, and they're like, oh no, are you going to gain life? And I was like, yes, I'm going to gain life. And then the life gain was not the problem because they were just dead before I passed the turn back. I love that here. It's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, and those card advantage engines with Joyra and some other things you mentioned, I think are really, really important. As is like the haste, Thopter Engineer giving all your artifact creatures haste, and then Jawbone Skulkin giving all your red creatures haste just means you can come out of the gate really fast. I
was trying to figure out if there was a hand that could kill on turn 1 without Devilish Valet, thanks to Jawbone Skulkin and Thopter Engineer, but nothing hits anywhere near hard enough. It would have to involve a Nettle Cyst, and you can't actually give the Germ token haste. I guess you could equip the Nettle Cyst, but that costs another
Ring
mana.
Of Vulcus. You gotta have Ring of Vulcus.
Do not have Ring of Vulcus. And Pyrokinesis was fantastic. That was my turn 0 interaction of choice.
Also love to hear that, yeah.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is I had a devastating pick in the 3rd or 4th pack later in the draft where I had to pick some strong playable, I forget what it was, for my deck that was like solidly top quarter of like card quality in my deck, or Disruptor Flute. And I really wanted the Disruptor Flute, but felt like I needed to kind of like commit to the aggro strategy, and I would have loved Disruptor Flute in this deck still, and also my opponent played it against me, and it was great. And then I think those turn 0 sort of interaction are really, I think, added depth to this cube in a way that's very cool.
That's great to hear. I mean, what kinds of things were people targeting with Disruptor Flute? I haven't actually seen that in play so much yet.
My opponent was using it to blank my Umezawa's Jite and my Smuggler's Copter.
Makes sense.
And I think even had a line, we actually talked about this afterwards, where they like cast the Disruptor Flute and started saying the target immediately. I'm like, hold on, don't do that, because I have counters.
Be careful.
I have counters on my Umezawa's Jite, and I cannot respond to you choosing a card, and so I'm motivated to use these counters now, and then if you want, you could just name Smuggler's Copter. I think they probably should have in that situation. They ended up still naming the Jite, because I think they were scarred from the first game where I sort of owned them with it. Jite is really strong when you can hit your opponent with it on turn 1, and they begin their game with you having a Jite with 2 counters on it. Like, that's pretty rough.
Yeah, that's also cool to see, because often Jite is just not a card that It's another kind of joke card.
Oh,
But,
I don't think that was a joke at all.
It does a lot
I think it's great.
when it works.
I think it's really good. I really wanted to, at some point, get the opportunity to put some counters on Jite, on Devilish Valet, and then pump it before I played creatures so that the doubling went even more dummy, but that never happened for me. Very sad.
Would have been cool.
Yeah.
My games didn't go quite as good. I actually only played 2 rounds of this just because somebody had to leave a little early, but it went okay. I feel like this was sort of like proof of concept. I lost my first match to the kinds of things I expected to. Like, I drew the Galvanic Relay, which is a very good card that was pulling me into red, but my deck wasn't focused enough on being able to storm off that I was going to have some hands where it was just not really going to do anything, and I'm just, like, cycling it for 1 mana.
Okay, real quick, pause. Is Galvanic Relay good?
I think so.
Because I've actually been questioning it in 100 Ornithopters, which, for all intents and purposes, Galvanic Relay and 100 Ornithopters in this cube is as close to exactly how it's going to, like,
Right.
It plays so similarly in both cubes, despite them being radical, weird cubes. But I found so often that the fact that you have to have, like, essentially 2 storm turns back to back. You have to, like, generate enough of a storm count to make a Galvanic Relay good, and then face up past the turn and let your opponent see what they have to beat next turn. It ends up being just, like, pretty slow. Plus, if you have, like, combo pieces in your deck and you have any kind of combo and you flip them off of Galvanic Relay, you are, like, priced into, you have to cast that next turn, otherwise you're going to lose it forever. It's just going to stay in exile. There's, like, no getting it back. So even if it's not the thing you'd want to cast off of Galvanic Relay, you just kind of have to. I'm starting to question it a little more than I initially was in 100 Ornithopters.
All these points are true, and I think there's an additional knock against it in the Turbo Cube because you'll cast it, flip over 5 cards, and be like, oh, well, 2 of these cards have cycling, and I can't cycle them from exile.
That is true.
This is probably one of the biggest culprits that got Judge Bones to say that the
people cycling cards off Galvanic Relay.
The only ruling that had to be clarified for Turbo Cube in one of the Cube Cons was that you can only cycle from your hand.
Which seems so self-evident.
It seems
and
obvious,
yes,
but as soon as you're just like in this mode, you're like, okay, I know what these cards do. This I cycle, this I cycle, this I cycle, and then you exile 5 cards from your library and you just try and keep doing it. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm still very high on it, but you're not wrong. I mean, the dream combo is casting Lelia and then Galvanic Relay, and because it's a Storm card, it counts each of those exiles separately and just makes Lelia huge, which
that is almost
fun.
worth including it just for that, honestly.
I've done it one time,
that's very
and it
cool.
was great. That was one of my turn 1 kills, was play Lelia, cast Galvanic Relay. I think Bergie was also involved. But I did win my second match, and it was a really interesting match. Like, the games went very long. I sort of felt like I had the proof of concept of I'm going to play some Hate Bears, play my Planeswalkers, and generate value slowly, or be able to, even though I can't cast spells, I'm activating Retrofitter Foundry. We actually had some funny games where I played a Hate Bear, my opponent played a Hate Bear, and we're both just like, okay. One of us must be wrong about this. But in those situations, it really felt like the Planeswalkers and also some like key interaction, like a couple of Disenchants and Force of Vigor, especially for that turn 0 interaction, played out pretty well. So overall, deck feels a little bit unfocused, but interesting stuff. And it's cool to be playing this cube and still feel like there is stuff to explore, even though the card list hasn't changed much in a while.
Do you feel reinvigorated after playing it to make changes to it, or you just don't care?
A little bit. I just have a lot of hobbies.
You got a lot of weird lemons levitating in jars that are making boozy goop.
And
we will not
taking up
explain
a certain
that.
amount of brain space just thinking about my boozy goop. Got to go home and turn my Koji when I get after this record.
It's a good hobby. Well, that was our Turbo Cube draft from last week. Just last night, we had a draft where we have like a little list of cubes that are going to get drafted on Tuesday in our Discord, and people can add their cubes to it. And generally, it's kind of like a first come, first serve. Like if you add your cube first, we'll try and prioritize filling that one up. And if you add it later, then that'll be a lower priority. And we usually have like one cube that's like a backup cube. Like if we need a 5th, pod, there'll be an extra cube in there just in case. And this time, the person that brought a backup cube was like, I've got a cube. It's my brother's, and I don't know what's in it, but I can bring it. And we're like, sure, great, whatever. And we ended up drafting this cube that was basically a mystery to us. Now, the person that brought it, he had played it once before, and so he's like, except for the cards I remember seeing, I don't know what this cube is about. And he started trying to explain it, and I was like, I don't want to know. I want this to be a mystery. This is like a rare treat to get to like go in completely blind and know that all but you in this pot are also going in completely blind. And we ended up drafting what was like I said to you after the draft, I was like, I think it was a good experience for you and I, because I think it's like the rare exposure to like what most people's cubes are. Like this person that built the cube is this guy's brother, who I think is a, fairly competitive constructed player, but is not in the cube scene, did not know Cube Cobra existed, never considered putting a list of their cube online anywhere. Like, why would I bother doing that? And it was just kind of like a collection of iconic, powerful cards that this person had played with and enjoyed. And I would say, like, there's no way to make this sound judgmental, but I promise it's
Well,
not.
let's sandwich it. Did you have fun in the draft?
Yeah, I did.
Great, me too.
I was going to say that it was kind of like under-designed in the sense that like this person clearly had not like thought about it a whole bunch, which again, it's hard to make that not sound judgmental, but truly I don't mean it that way. It's like, it's awesome. This is like a collection cube.
Just say it the other way. Say it hasn't been overtuned.
Yeah, it definitely has not been overtuned in the way that that Richard Garfield would describe.
I thought that experience was very funny, that this was, somebody that was coming out to Cube Night the first time, playing with this cube they weren't super familiar with, and like in a context they weren't super familiar with. Like we have a
play group,
like you mentioned, a play group that is just like really willing to dive into stuff and doesn't necessarily focus on having a lot of preparation going into cubes. And so he was a little bit apologetic, like, sorry, I don't have a cube list, and sorry, I'm not exactly sure what's going on. And we're like, nah, we're all good. We are ready to just jump in and wing it, and we'll like figure out what's going on based on the cards in the pack. I thought that was very fun. I really enjoyed drafting cubes that way, as we've talked about ad nauseum, and I think that pretty much everybody else felt the same.
Yeah, I think I realized when talking to him that for people that have never come to Cube Night, there's like two big emotional barriers, and one is like, I don't know what Cube Night's like, I don't know what the other players are like, I don't know what the culture is like. And the other one, if they haven't been, is I don't know what No Land Beyond is. I don't know what this space is. And so many people come to Cube Night for the first time after they've been to a pre-release. And it's like, okay, I know what a pre-release is. This is a known sort of construct to me. I will use this pre-release as an excuse to go to the new local game store, go to a game store I've not been to before. And then once they've been to the game store once before, they're like, okay, and that variable sort of answered. Now I'm willing and able to take on the variable of what is Cube Night like. I just think that double those variables makes it kind of hard to sell people on it, where it's like, come to a place you've never been, to see people you've never met before, to play a format you've never played before, or are play very rarely, is a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, that's a really good point I hadn't thought about. I mean, and I remember, sort of as a parallel, the first time I went and played Commander at a local game store, that I wasn't playing with people I already knew. It was just like, I'm going to go up to the store, and I have no idea what it's going to be like, and I don't know if my decks are going to be too powerful, or if they're going to be underpowered, or if people are going to hate that I have some particular commander. And that is a little bit nerve-wracking. And even in that context, like, it was a store that I at least had gone to and bought some booster packs from, and like knew what the space was like. So there was, one or a couple barriers removed. And here there's the added barrier of, okay, well, generally we say, like, come a couple times and we'll get your cube in the rotation, like, reward people who are invested in the group.
Which, frankly, almost no one ever asks if they can bring their cube in the first night. Yeah. But when they do, we're like, just come out a couple times first. Just see if you enjoy it.
Which makes sense. It's reasonable. We need another cube. They had it, so there's this extra sort of like potential for, I don't know, anxiety.
It's extra vulnerable to then bring your own cube and put it up to vulnerable. Be potentially judged.
Yeah, so I think maybe there's a little bit.
We did judge it, and we will judge it right now on our podcast. This under-designed mess.
No. I think that one of the fun challenges of a cube like this, when you're drafting it sort of unknown, is figuring out, like, okay, what are the limiting factors here? What are the things that I really need to focus on and pick up on? And what do I need to adjust? And one of the things that I sort of picked up on pretty quickly was, compared to a lot of the cubes that we play, they were fairly light on lands, which isn't a problem. It just meant me as a drafter, I was like, okay, any fetch land, I'm absolutely taking. Shock lands, just going to take them kind of speculatively because I know they're going to be a valuable resource. And similarly, removal. One of the cards, you might have heard me say, like, yes, I was looking for this, was just Swords to Plowshares. I just needed some efficient removal.
You say just Swords to Plowshares, the best removal spell ever printed. So.
But I was like, this is a big hole in my deck that I'm not going to be able to beat a Reanimator deck, and having like one or two pieces of removal I felt much better about. So I had a lot of fun diving into this cube pretty blind.
I'll talk my draft first. I had the same experience. I opened the first pack and it had a fetch land in it and some other like kind of iconic modern-ish, legacy-ish power level cards. There was definitely a wide power level band. I would say like 80 to 85% of the cards are cards that I like would have guessed. If you said someone's going to bring out a random cube that's just like their cube, I would have certainly expected a card like that would show up on the list. And then there were some weird ones. Like this person that designed this cube clearly had an affinity for land destruction. There was every variation, every variation of Stone Rain ever printed, as well as like some weird creatures. Like Ian had like a 4-mana ape that like destroyed a non-basic land on ETB, like a 4-mana 2/2, like just kind of some funky stuff where I was like, I've never actually even seen that card before.
And guess what? It destroyed my non-basic land, which was a problem for me.
Did it destroy your Temple Garden when you needed white?
No. Don't worry. I fetched up a basic Plains after it destroyed my Hallowed Fountain, and I was like, it was fine. I played around it. I didn't cast my blue spells. It was no problem.
So I took a Marsh Flats Pack 1 over a Balance, thinking Balance is the kind of card that requires support. We've already talked about it a little bit in this episode, but it is a favorite card of mine. I do like playing Control. And it's the kind of card that I don't think you can just jam in a random cube and have it be like effective. I think you need enough ways to break parity on it, which is the most common way is just mana rocks. Like if you have mana rocks, that's a mana producing thing, that's a permanent that does not get counted by balance. Obviously, planeswalkers are a huge way to break parity, and then you can also get into stuff like Retrofit or Foundry or other sort of, non-creature, non-land permanents that like provide value. But I had no idea if any of those were in the cube. There were none in the pack I was looking at, and so I was like, I'll take this Marsh Flats and like stay open. Pack 2 was much less good, if memory serves. I forget what was in it, and I ended up taking a Blood Crypt speculatively. And I just take lands highly no matter what. You were like, oh, I noticed there are very few lands. I'm going to take them highly. That's just what I do in every cube. I don't care what it is. I'm always taking fetch lands and good fixing very, very highly. Then it became pretty clear that blue was open. I left pack 1 almost mono blue. I had a speculative Tinker that I picked up, again, not having yet seen anything that could possibly be good with Tinker. I had some just iconic good blue cards, and then on the wheel, the balance came back, and I had to choose between balance or Venser Shaper Savant, which in my mind is like a kind of medium playable blue card, but not a thing I would like hugely miss if it wasn't in my deck. And I was like, all right, well, I'm definitely playing blue, so Venser is like a safe card, but if I can make this balance good, then that'll be one of the best cards in my deck. No one else took it, so if there is a deck here that wants balance, maybe the pieces won't be fought for either. So I took balance and ended up going blue-white basically on the back of that decision. And my deck was a interesting, I would call it blue-white mid-range. I did not have any board wipes. I had a little bit of target removal, a little bit of counterspells, but mostly I had token generators in the form of like Lingering Souls, Spectral Procession, Raise the Alarm. I had Opposition and Trade Wind Rider as ways to benefit from making a bunch of tokens. And then I had this like kind of funky like late game reanimation synergy between Karmic Guide and Revelark. That can be an infinite combo with a sack outlet, but I didn't have a sack outlet. So it just meant that when I blocked in combat, I could just have them get each other back indefinitely forever, while the Revelark was also getting one additional thing back every time it went through.
Blocking feels like a pretty good sack outlet, at least in our range.
Well, I mean, I certainly would have liked to have just won the game when I did that instead of us playing 12 more turns of me looping my, graveyard over and over again and still ending up losing. But yeah, that was my deck, and I ended up not being able to play the Tinker or the balance. It became very clear. We were drafting a team draft. We did 4 packs of 11, so halfway through pack 3, I was like, I still have not seen a single mana rock, and no real targets for Tinker. Like, I saw like a Phyrexian Colossus, which to me is like a pretty bad card. I'm not like tinkering into Phyrexian Colossus in an environment like this with these kinds of powerful effects going around. And I was just like, I don't see anything for Tinker. Don't see anything for balance. So I ended up giving on both of those, which were both kind of like high-ish picks, which was kind of a bummer. And I ended up just with this kind of blue-white, mid-rangey, good stuffy, somewhat blinky deck. I had Solitude and Ephemerate, which is quite a good combo. And otherwise was just playing good stuff. I did splash Psychic Frog, which I got quite late. I splashed it off of a Prismatic Vista. And then I had to play some swamps.
And a swamp.
I also had a Marsh Flats, to be fair, which did not have a duel to get, because the only non-basic lands I ended up with my entire pool were Marsh Flats and Prismatic Vista. I saw no on-color fetchables once I got started in down blue-white, and so I have this speculative Blood Crypt, which just sat in my sideboard, and unfortunately the Watery Grave and the Psychic Frog were in the same pack, and I was like, well...
Right, that is what happened.
I was like, I will play Psychic Frog off swamps, and I did. My mana base was a problem. Like, it did lose me probably at least a game, and make other games pretty clunky. I also won games where I resolved Psychic Frog, so I don't know what was correct, but that's what I did because I like playing with Psychic Frog.
It's a cool card, I guess. I ended up also drafting blue-white. I remember some of those packs where I was having... Yeah, which means we both drafted correctly, right? I think my first picks were Philia, a fetch land, a Flooded Strand, and I think my third pick was either Soul Herder, maybe Soul Herder was fourth pick, and there was another white card in there. And between those two cards, I was pretty interested in sort of pursuing this Blink theme. I ended up committing fairly heavily to white and was open to playing blue as my second color, but did, at least in pack 2, take some other speculative picks like Flage and the 4-mana Shieldred and some other like just really powerful cards that I was like, okay, well maybe depending on what fixing I see and if there's other sort of synergistic things, maybe I end up splashing red or black, or maybe I end up just abandoning blue and switching into red-white or black-white. But those ended up seeming not that splashable in the end, or not that playable, not as good as the blue cards. So I was playing mostly white, fairly aggressive, with outs to playing the long game with some blink things. Notably, I had Soul Herder and the Teleportation Circle, which I think this is, again, like talking about this cube is a little bit less tuned. Like, Teleportation Circle is not a card that you're going to see in the most high-powered vintage cubes.
I mean,
but
neither is Soul Herder, let's be honest.
and Soul Herder, but it was like really cool to play them here, and I really enjoyed playing with them. Oh, and Parallax Wave I'll also count as like a really flexible card that also can re-trigger a bunch of ETBs. So the key targets were Blade Splicer, Reflector Mage. What else we got here?
You better have way more, because you drew the sequence of those cards in all of our games.
Mole Drifter's pretty cool. And then just some like very good curve filler in things like Brimaz and Hero of Bladehold and Archangel of Thune, which, I'm just delighted to always play Archangel of Thune. And Bribery, for some reason. Bribery is a pretty good card. Will end some games.
It's funny because it like didn't end our games. It was just so groan-inducing.
Well, that was the funny thing is you had the Tradewind Rider so you could bounce anything. And so I was like, Bribery, get your subtlety. I get to exile something. But then I was like, wait a minute.
You keep calling it subtlety. It's solitude.
Solitude. Same word. Synonyms. Not at all. They're
Not even
more
close.
like...
The subtlety is the blue one, which is
yeah.
extra confusing.
There's too many Magic cards. The white Swords to Plowshares on pants is what I'm going to call it.
Swords to Plowshares
or on a
pants.
stick is the phrase.
That's a little more normal.
And then I was like, oh wait, but if I do this, I can exile something, but then you just bounce it, put it back in your hand, and then you get to exile my great cards, which I didn't want to die. So I ended up just getting like Charming Prince and gaining life in order to put more counters on my creatures to try and push more pressure on you. And then you played Opposition, and so you're tapping all my creatures. It was a whole thing. This game went on for a long time, and eventually I was just like, I don't know if I win through combat, but I have at least 2 Disenchants in my deck, so I can draw one of those to kill your opposition, or maybe you just deck yourself, and I think that's what ended up happening, or at least that became the inevitability.
My Ancestral Vision came off of Suspend, and I was like, well, I have to cast it.
That was funny. Yeah.
I was like, I can target you, because I have 5 cards in my deck and no clock.
Because my teammate pointed that out.
I would have realized that. It was before the last counter came off that your teammate pointed that out. But what I didn't realize until we put it on the stack was, oh, you have a Thalia. I just won't pay the 1, so I'll just let my Ancestral Vision not get cast.
Very cool.
Which is pretty cool stuff.
I also had a Birthing Pod in my deck, which I never ended up casting. It was useful when my opponents made me discard cards. But my thinking was, okay, I have a lot of key creatures that I want to get. I want to be re-triggering ETBs, so it kind of fits here. Although I definitely didn't have the best Birthing Pod curve and definitely was going to lose a lot of life if I ever wanted to use it.
Yeah. I ended up going 1 and 2 with this deck. We had a really close match that went super long and was super grindy.
Yeah. The first 2 games went very quickly, and then game 3, we just had this incredible grind fest.
Yeah, where like I had Opposition and 8 Spirit tokens, and it was not enough to prevent you from teleportation circling
3/3 every turn.
your Blade Splicer over and over again, and you also got 3 or 4 hits in with the Archangel of Thune, putting a bunch of counters on a bunch of your things, and you attacked many times without me losing any life, but I was, in fact, drawing cards constantly, and it did eventually deck myself.
Yeah.
It was, frankly, my least favorite type of Magic, because you got to the end, you were like, I wonder if we made any mistakes. And I'm like, brother, we made so many mistakes.
Well, I thought that
we just
Bribery,
played a 24-turn Magic game with like a massive, complicated board. Sound off in the comments. Here's the important things. I'm curious to know what you would do. I have a Tradewind Rider. You have a Teleportation Circle Blade Splicer combo. What
do you do?
Without any more information, what should I be Tradewind Ridering every single turn? Because I can Tradewind Rider the Blade Splicer when you go to target it with Teleportation Circle, which means you don't get a new 3/3, but then you just get to cast it again next turn, which means you get to make another 3/3 anyway, just a turn later. And at this point, none of us were spending our mana on our turns. We both had 12 lands. Like, mana was like not a factor.
Well, it was a factor because I also had the Celestial Colonnade that I wanted to attack you with.
Yeah, I eventually just killed that.
The game also had a big turn where I had sided in a Supreme Verdict because you also had a very creature-heavy strategy, and at some point we had this huge board, and I'm just going to cast Supreme Verdict and have a couple creatures in my hands to cast afterwards, and then you did that whole Karmic Guide thing, and the game continued.
Well, yeah, I also got to put the Karmic Guide back in my hand with Tradewind Rider that was in play, and then play the Karmic Guide, get back Gravelark, and then say, like, all right, go ahead, attack me. It was a mess, a huge mess. Very complicated game, and yeah, I don't know. Like, to me, it's like, I didn't get to strategize. I just got to try and do a bunch of accounting for a long time. But regardless, we had a very close match. I thought it was very interesting. I liked our match overall, even if that game sort of devolved into a sort of game state that is not my favorite. The second match, I won pretty handily, and then the third match, I just got really bad beats. My deck did not function. I, kept 3 landers on the play, and then didn't draw any lands, missed 2 land drops, and then got Stone Rained. And it's like, okay, well, Cool.
Yeah, worth noting, somebody did read the signal and drafted the Stone Rain deck, and they had a bunch of Stone Rains. How did they end up? 1 and 2 or 2 and 1? I think 2 and 1.
Yeah, they must have been because their team won the draft. I made the mistake of, before the draft, they had Crucible of Worlds strip mine, and I was like, well, I can't beat that. Like, I have no answer for Crucible of Worlds in my entire deck, except for countering it if I play into open mana and I have one of my 3 counter spells. I just lose to that. And they were like, well, I also have Stone Rains. And I was like, I'm actually not worried about those. This is what I said before the match. I was like, if you're going to spend 3 mana
Famous
in a
last
card
words.
getting rid of one of my lands, because I was playing full 17 lands and I had like card advantage. I had, cantrips and stuff. And I had to play more lands than I wanted to typically because I needed to hit my sources for my, splash. But if you took me off black and I couldn't cast Psychic Frog or the other side of Lingering Souls, it's certainly not the end of the world. But instead, in 2 games, I just didn't draw lands beyond the 2nd or 3rd. And then eventually on turn 4 or 5, got Stone Rained and was just like, okay. I thought it was a really interesting experiment to draft a cube completely sight unseen. My takeaways were that, yeah, I think you and I and our play group are like kind of out of touch with what a normal cube is, and somebody who's not like involved in like reading about cube design or listening to cube podcasts or talking in cube discords, the kind of cube they end up making.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, is we might be describing it as this cube designer is not in touch with our very small community, but the reality is we are the out of touch people, and we are just like,
oh, for sure,
turned inward on our weird little hobby here.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be so many cubes like this that are not even on Cube Cobra,
right, yeah,
that like nobody has bothered to document. Like, this is probably, the majority of the cube world by at least number of cubes. I don't think his cube is drafted very often, and so by number of cube drafts that are happening, I think maybe that's where the more invested players and designers, have an outsized impact. I did have some design revelations, even though this is not my cube, just because I was like getting in reps with cards I've considered for other cubes. And I've decided that I hate Ancestral Vision more than almost any other Magic card.
You're going to stop putting that card in cubes?
I mean, I haven't put it in any cubes so far.
That's what I thought.
But I've considered it for a couple cubes, and this is just the Suspend Ancestral recall.
Is this true? You just hate bad top decks? You hate more than anything drawing
really
a tap land when
Yeah.
you just need that like 4th mana or whatever,
Yeah.
and drawing a Suspend card on turn 6 or whatever, and you're empty-handed, and it's like, great, here's my draw 3, but I don't get it for 3 turns.
It's a spend 4. You don't get it for a long time. It's a card that I have enjoyed playing with in other cubes when I draw it in my opening hand or within the first couple turns of the game.
This all makes sense.
Where it is obviously much better. I think also if I was like a really hard control deck, I might have still been okay with it, because in the late game, it's like, hopefully
You don't care how long the game goes.
Hopefully I've got the game under control. I'm happy to play the late game, and so I can just, on turn 5, you spend one of my mana to suspend this, and still hold up removal and counter spells, and just like deal with things. Otherwise, I could see it being viable there, but like I said, I was a weird mid-range deck, and the number of times it was just a dead card. Like, I literally resolved it once, and it was... I didn't resolve it because I didn't pay the 1 for Thalia. These are the number of times that it came off Suspend. It just sat on Suspend while the game ended, one way or the other. So I'm kind of really off that card, I think. And Spectral Procession is very good. Yeah. 2-Brid cards are cool, and I'm playing a lot of them in my new cube, Take 5, and I'm excited about 2-Brid.
I'm now questioning that Thalia interaction a little bit more, because it's not like a counter unless I pay 1. It just costs an additional. So are you? I'm pretty sure you're not obligated to pay that one.
Can't be obligated. I can just tap on my lands and my like it's an upkeep trigger.
Who knows?
I am 95% certain you are not somehow obligated to do it. I'm sure the suspend text says try to cast it if you can, and if you can't, too bad. And
oh, right. Actually, now I'm remembering, I think they also reworded suspend so that you can just choose not to cast it, which used to not be the case.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did they?
Yeah. So I don't think we need Thalia at all. Anyway, this has been Rules Corner. Maybe Judge Bones will correct us about this. On my side of the table, we played match 1. I won that through that slog of a game 3. Match 2, I was playing against what turned out to be a mono-red. I think it was mono-red aggro deck with a little bit of an artifact theme, and I wasn't sure how this was going to go. Like, I have plenty of great draws, and I had at least one Wrath in the sideboard I could pull in, but there's plenty of ways my deck could go wrong and just, get out aggroed. Turned out, game 1, my opponent played Figure of Destiny, and Philia turns out to be really good against Figure of Destiny, because as soon as they dump a bunch of mana into it, I just blink it and it gets small again. So interesting sort of like close game 1, but I did manage to win. And then game 2 was not particularly close. I just had like the dream curve of, I want to say it was like Mother of Runes into Precinct Captain into Brimaz and just out aggro the aggro deck, which doesn't always happen, but I got pretty lucky there, I'll be honest.
I will say, I love my teammate. It wasn't really an aggro deck. It was kind of just all the red cards that this person drafted.
That sounds like an aggro deck to me.
I mean, it had like Thran Dynamo in it, and
okay, that's not really an aggro
engine
card.
And Batter Skull.
The two together are an aggro card, which makes
not
me
really.
sad
It's
that
still
I
a turn 5 Wormcoil engine.
makes me sad that I took out bribery against them.
Yeah.
And then match 3 was interesting. I played against the owner of the cube, and they had
Owner of the Cube's brother.
You're right.
The caretaker of the Cube.
Caretaker of the cube, the cube host. I kept some pretty slow, pretty bad hands, but then they played Tango Wire in both of our games, and I was like,
You're like, great, now your hand's slow and bad too.
I wasn't going to do anything with this mana anyway. Definitely still made some mistakes where I'm like, what cards can I draw? Do I want to tap my creature or do I want to tap my lands? And then it's like, oh yeah, of course, I drew this one card I hadn't considered and whatever, some little mistakes. But overall, I just had a ton of fun with this deck. I feel like I like Blink strategy is not something I usually do, but definitely appeals to a certain like, I don't know, game aesthetic sensibility of like, you called it accounting, and it's like, yeah, sometimes it is kind of fun just to count up and be like, now I have 6 golems, now I have 7 golems.
6
Look at all my
golems.
golems. And drawing a bunch of cards with Muldrifter is a delight. Many people know this.
I've considered Teleportation Circle for Sacred Geometry, and I think I told you that night that playing against it made me think, even though this is clean, it fits the description of what I want in Sacred Geometry, I do not really like the play patterns because it's a 4-mana enchantment that does nothing unless you have a creature with an ETB, or you can give something pseudo-vigilance, which is pretty low value for your 4-mana, and a card effect. And the fact that in one of our games, the one that I won handily, I just kept you off of creatures.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, well, I spent 4 mana and
Great.
a card doing
You have
nothing.
removal. You can just dismantle my whole strategy by destroying half of my cards, and the other half don't do anything.
And by half of your cards, I think I just removed 2 things in that game. I removed Reflector Mage, which is the thing that mattered, and like one other thing, which
like
had
I said,
marginal
half of
value.
my cards.
Either way, it's just very sort of polarizing, and then when it does work, it's like, great, now we're doing the classic fun Magic thing of taking the same game action every single turn repeatedly, which I'm not totally opposed to that. I do have things like Gravecrawler in that cube, which I like a lot. But I think Teleportation Circle is one that I'm just off for Sacred Geometry after playing against it.
The combination of it being like both very swingy in that way and guaranteed if it is succeeding, it's going to be pretty repetitive. I mean, like the Dream Blink thing is like, oh, I have this like toolbox of all kinds of cards that have different effects.
That's not what anyone ever does.
It never really turns out that way.
No.
But yeah, I mean, again, like as a thing I'm going to draft occasionally and like be conscious of, yeah, this is the deck I'm going to draft and I'm going to go into it. And I definitely feel like I will sometimes just avoid drafting a certain strategy when I just don't feel like I'm going to have fun with it that night. Players can set their own expectations about what they're going to draft. Can't so much control what their opponents are doing, but sometimes you get stone rained. What can I say?
I couldn't be mad about it. I was like, yeah. I mean, I was a little frustrated by not drawing lands, but I certainly was not frustrated with my opponent. It's like, yeah, the Ice Storm is the green one from like beta or something.
Ice Storm.
There's a green Stone Rain. It's just green Stone Rain from some early set. Ice something. I think we're out of time. We could talk about Sacred Geometry some other time, perhaps, but this was a good rundown of our 2 most recent drafts. 2 very different experiences. I had a great time drafting the Weird Mystery Cube and just finding out what was going on. Like I said, I think getting a taste of what a normal cube is like. A normal cube that for people that aren't completely disgustingly cube-pilled and weirdos.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that struck me most about it was so often we talk about cubes need to be focused and like stick to your one plan and your core identity. And this cube was clearly doing multiple things at once. It was like iconic cards that were powerful in different formats, but it was also clearly a lot of like sort of pet cards like Volrath Shapeshifter. And I'm just like, this is great. I love Volrath Shapeshifter. I get to look at it twice during the draft, and it's got
and then in my sideboard for the rest of the draft. And on that bombshell, that is the conclusion of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you oh so much for tuning in. All the music for this show is created by DJ James Nasty, and the show is edited by Matthew. All the Magic cards are designed by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is produced by Thinking Really Hard About Magic Cards and then speaking into microphones about it. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for playing Cube with me every single week without fail.
I did miss a week back there. I was traveling.
Who's counting?
Not you, apparently.